It was supposed to be dark. That's what the town had told itself for decades, that the building on the hill was empty, powerless, and finally forgotten. But one night in early autumn, a soft yellow glow flickered through a third-story window of the old Maine State Hospital. A light, faint, silent, moving. It was 3:12 a.m. when the local sheriff's office got the first call. A night shift gas station attendant had stepped outside for a cigarette and looked up toward the horizon. He swore he saw the window blink, like someone passing in front of a lamp. At first, they dismissed it. Kids, maybe. Trespassers. Someone trying to break into the abandoned facility again. But when the first patrol car arrived, everything changed. The front gates were locked, the perimeter fence rusted but intact. No sign of a break-in, and yet that hallway was glowing. When officers made entry, what they found wasn't damage. It wasn't vandalism. It was absence. The corridors were cold, the floors dustless. Beds were still made. One stretcher in the EA had dried blood on its rim, but it looked recent. That's when one of the deputies, leaning against a loose metal frame in the hallway, noticed something odd. The panel didn't feel like the others. It echoed differently, hollow. He tugged. The panel creaked, then snapped. Behind it was a shallow cavity in the wall, a strange space, maybe a foot deep. And inside, sealed in a dusty plastic bag, 14 patient files. No names. No official hospital markings, just numbers and dates. One dated October 11th, 1978, the very day the hospital was shut down. Suddenly, the lights shut off. The hallway returned to darkness, but the files remained. What follows is the untold story of the Maine hospital, the 14 hidden patients, and the light that should have never turned on again. The final discharge, October 12th, 1978. The sun barely rose on that October morning. The clouds were thick, like layers of cotton soaked in rainwater, hanging low over the town of Anderville, Maine. Cold mist laced the treetops behind the hospital, curling through the branches like breath held too long. Inside the Maine State Hospital, a skeleton crew prepared for a final walkthrough. No more patients, no more nurses. Just one last formality, locking the place down. But something was off. Officially, the last patient had been discharged on October 11th. The building was supposed to be empty. Yet when the maintenance team arrived, they heard faint tapping, like fingernails brushing against a radiator, coming from the upper psychiatric ward. They ignored it at first, assuming it was the building settling. But the sound followed them, growing sharper, more deliberate, as if it were pacing, waiting. When they reached room 3C, they stopped. The door was open, not wide, but enough to see that the bed was made perfectly. Too perfectly. On the knitstand sat a small wax paper cup with water. The water was half full. The room had no running service since the night before. It shouldn't have been there. The team called it in. Protocol. But there was no report filed. Instead, the supervisor told them to finish the sweep and shut the wing. They did. And they didn't speak of the cup again. What the hospital didn't realize, or maybe what it didn't want to admit, was that 14 patients remained undocumented. 14 individuals who had never been formally discharged, never transferred, never listed in any closing paperwork. Their existence, like the water in that cup, lingered quietly. Not loud enough to be questioned, just present enough to unsettle. By midday, the gates were locked, the records stored, electricity cut, and yet, in room 3C, that cup of water didn't spill, didn't evaporate. It stayed full, waiting. For years, the town tried to forget. They tore down signs, covered windows with boards. But each October, someone would claim to see a shadow in the third-floor window. A flicker. A shape. Nothing more. It wasn't until a maintenance worker stumbled onto the hidden cavity in 2006 that the hospital's lie began to unravel. 14 patient files. No names, no discharges, no signatures, just timestamps. And all of them ended on the same day the hospital shut down. But if they were never discharged, where did they go? The hidden 14. Who were they? The files weren't thick. Each was no more than a few pages, the paper yellowed at the edges, crisp and brittle from years behind drywall. The handwriting, where it existed, was scrawled in black ink, rushed, inconsistent, almost frantic in parts. And every file was marked only by a single number. No names, no photos, no official signatures. Just 14 numerical designations. The oldest was simply marked, Patient 001 admitted, May 6, 1952. The last, Patient 014, admitted, October 10, 1978, only 2 days before the hospital was shut down. But here's what no one could explain. Patient 014's admission sheet had been folded inside out, as if someone had hidden it even from the others. The document was torn, but one word was still legible, scrawled near the top margin. In red ink that had bled into the paper, transferred. There was no transfer destination listed. No discharge time. No nurse's initials. The ink was different from the rest fresher. Newer, like it had been added after the files had already been hidden. It raised the question, who was patient 014? And why would someone risk returning to an abandoned hospital years after its closure just to alter a file? As investigators dug deeper, whispers began to surface. Former employees were contacted, orderlies, therapists, clerks. Most didn't return calls. A few who did denied any knowledge of the numbers. But one retired nurse, Eleanor Bridgman, finally agreed to speak. She hadn't worked in the psychiatric wing directly, she claimed, but she remembered a hallway one that wasn't on the blueprints. It curved differently, longer than it should have been. It led to a sealed door at the far end, with no window and no number. She had passed it once, delivering a file, and the silence from that hall, she said, was wrong. Too still, she whispered, like the air was waiting. When shown a photo of the recovered files, Eleanor froze. Her eyes locked on a scribble at the bottom of the last page in the Patient 014 folder. Barely visible, almost accidental. It wasn't a word. It was a drawing. A small spiral, thick in the center, unraveling into jagged edges. Eleanor's hands trembled. That's what they carved, she said, almost breathless. On the walls, in their skin. I've seen it. No further comment. The interview ended abruptly. 14 patients. 14 rooms no one ever accounted for. And one symbol linking them all. The hospital hadn't just forgotten them. It had hidden them. And maybe, just maybe, those patients had never left. The spiral code. The spiral wasn't unique at first glance. A crude shape, easily mistaken for a child's doodle or the idle scribble of a bored patient. But when law enforcement brought in a forensic analyst to scan the remaining documents and wall panels, something chilling came to light. The spiral wasn't random. It appeared 7 times in the margins of the hidden patient files, always drawn with subtle variations, but each time aligned at the same angle, tilted to the left, counterclockwise. The thicker the inner loop, the later the patient file. The spiral had evolved. And then it began showing up elsewhere. Inside the hospital's long-forgotten lower floors, beneath even the boiler room, sealed off after flooding in the early 1980s, another entrance was discovered. A service hallway, lined with rusted pipes, led to a sub-basement that hadn't been mapped on any archived plans. The door was welded shut. A makeshift barrier of chain-link fencing, long decayed. But behind it, drawn in faded chalk on the concrete wall, was a perfect match of the spiral from the 014 file. 6 feet wide, unbroken, meticulously drawn. The air was colder in that room. Not musty, not stale, but cold like a winter wind in the middle of September. One deputy swore his breath fogged as he stepped through, despite the temperature reading a steady 68 degrees. They found no bones, no bodies, but something else was left behind. A narrow table stood in the center of the chamber, its surface scorched like it had once been on fire, but the rest of the room was untouched. And on top, a reel-to-reel recorder, corroded but intact, still holding its magnetic tape. The label read only, "For Administrator USE, Code A." When audio specialists restored the tape, what they uncovered wasn't a medical record. It was a series of mantras, whispered in repetition, in what sounded like multiple voices speaking simultaneously, though analysts confirmed only a single track had been recorded. The words were hard to decipher. Some sections reversed, others warped, but one sentence kept repeating, always louder than the rest. "The spiral is the exit. The spiral is the return." Eleanor Bridgman, when contacted again, refused to listen to the audio. But she did offer one final statement, barely above a whisper. They weren't patients. They were ... experiments. And that spiral? It's not just a symbol. It's a gate. She hung up. She was never reached again. Suddenly, the pieces began to shift. The spirals. The hidden files. The light that flickered in 2023. Something or someone was trying to be found. Or worse, was already on its way back. The children of Ward 9. Ward 9 was never supposed to exist. On official hospital blueprints, there were only 8 patient wards. Each one color-coded, each assigned to specific categories: geriatric, psychiatric, high-risk, detox, juvenile, etc. But during a meticulous review of the hospital's old wiring diagrams, kept off-site in a municipal records basement, an engineer noticed something strange. An electrical grid servicing Zone 9. No lighting. No HVAC. Only power lines labeled LC-Chi-In, REC, and M-Chi-RM. When police revisited the hospital armed with this blueprint, they traced the path to a sealed stairwell behind the old Surgical Wing 1, previously assumed to lead nowhere. It didn't. Down 12 steps and through a collapsed corridor, they found a decaying green door. The plaque read, "Ward 9, Restricted Youth Observation." Inside was another world. The air was thick. Not just musty, but heavy as if saturated with silence. The floor was rubber, not tile. The walls had no windows. Only soft beige padding from top to bottom. There were 8 rooms, each identical, each containing only a single bed frame, bolted to the floor. In room 3, scrawled into the metal bedpost, was a name, Carly, and next to it, a number 014. It was the same as the missing patient file found behind the wall panel. Taped to the back of a cracked mirror in the common area was a faded photograph. 6 children, aged between 6 and 11, sat on the floor in identical hospital gowns. Each one was barefoot. Each one had a spiral drawn on the back of their hand in black ink. In the background, barely visible in the shadows, was a figure face obscured, wearing what looked like a technician's lab coat. They were holding a clipboard. But what chilled investigators most was this. The children weren't looking at the camera. They were looking up, toward the ceiling, expressions frozen in awe or fear. And above them, no ceiling fixtures, no skylights, just a single phrase, painted in large, childlike brushstrokes across the concrete. "We never left." Security logs buried deep in a now-defunct database showed that Ward 9 had been operational from April to October 1978. No entries. No exits. Just a weekly record labeled Stimulus Exposure Logged, and a signature, J.R. Haler, head of non-clinical research. No personnel records exist for that name. Local folklore, however, tells of an old children's ward that parents warned each other about, not because of illness, but because of sounds, soft singing late at night. Even years after the hospital had been condemned, people said it came from beneath the earth. Others said it came from the walls. But after Ward 9 was uncovered and the photographs circulated online, something peculiar happened. A woman in her 40s, now living in Colorado, came forward. She said she recognized one of the children in the picture. Her. "My name is Carly," she said. "But I don't remember that photo. I don't remember that place. I only remember the spiral. And every time I try to sleep, I still hear the humming." She had a scar on her palm. A perfect spiral about the size of a dime. Burned in. The redacted administrator. Every institution has someone behind the curtain. A name few recognize, a face that rarely appears in photos, and a presence that lingers only in footnotes and obscure memos. For the 1978 Maine Hospital, that person was known only as Administrator R. Vale. When the hospital was decommissioned, all official documents regarding management were transferred to the Department of Health Archives. Dozens of staff names appeared: nurses, custodians, orderlies, and senior physicians. But nowhere was there any mention of Administrator R. Vale. His name surfaced only once. It was on a requisition form dated September 3, 1978. The header read, "Request for additional soundproofing material, Ward 9. Signed simply, R. Vale." That document was later classified and pulled from public access. But a digital copy, uncatalogued, was recovered by an anonymous researcher who had been scraping hospital archive backups for unrelated historical data. When the image of the form leaked online, internet sleuths latched on. They dug through local birth records, employment databases, alumni registries. Nothing, no one named R. Vale had ever been employed in any hospital in the state of Maine. No one by that name had a social security number. No photographs. No paper trail. Until one appeared. A photo from a retirement banquet in 1977 held at a private lodge used by high-ranking government health officials. In the image, 6 people standing behind a long table. 5 of them were identified on the back of the frame. The 6th, labeled in pen, RV. He stood at the end of the row, tall, rigid, wearing a plain suit and dark-rimmed glasses. His face was angled just slightly away from the camera, as if deliberately dodging it. Facial recognition yielded no matches. But a blurred image on the table in front of him caught attention. A manila folder with the words Project Cordon stamped in red. No project by that name exists in public databases. But in the year following the hospital's closure, several records were sealed by emergency federal order. Among them, psychological studies, juvenile behavioral trials, and experimental sound-based therapy logs. The common name tied to all 3? R. Vale, a whistleblower, a former Department of Health clerk, now living overseas later, claimed R. Vale wasn't an administrator. He wasn't a doctor. He was an observer, planted, unlisted, assigned to facilities flagged for unusual compliance potential. He was there not to heal, but to monitor reactions. The implications were staggering. That the hospital may have been a test site, that children in Ward 9 were not just patients, but subjects, and that the files hidden behind the wall panel weren't lost, they were buried. On purpose. One final detail sent chills through the growing online community following the case. The photograph from the banquet had a timestamp on the back. March 14, 1977, the day Ward 9 officially opened. And at the very bottom, written in faint pencil, "Begin Phase 2 in 547 days. Exactly the day the hospital shut down. The humming beneath the floors." Sound is memory's oldest accomplice. Long after images fade and faces become unrecognizable, it is the hum of a place, the creak of wood, the buzz of lights, the subtle frequencies beneath awareness that clings to the mind like a ghost. And it was sound, not sight, that drew attention back to the abandoned Maine Hospital in 2005. Paranormal investigators had been inside dozens of similar buildings across the Northeast, but none had equipment react the way it did here. In the East Wing, their EMF detectors remained quiet. Temperatures dropped, but only slightly. The building was structurally intact, no strange movements, no flickering bulbs, until they reached the sub-level corridor once known as Ward 9. There, the hum began. At first, it registered as background interference, a low, persistent frequency around 17 hertz a pitch, nearly at the threshold of human hearing. Known in some circles as the ghost frequency, it's been tied to sensations of dread, visual hallucinations, and paranoia. Their first assumption: it was coming from old pipes or leftover electrical wiring. But their thermal scanner told another story. There was no power running to that part of the building. They traced the hum to a central room at the end of the corridor. A sealed door, no doorknob, just a faintly vibrating wall and a sensation described by one investigator as like standing inside a tuning fork. When they placed a contact microphone against the wall, they expected mechanical vibrations. What they recorded instead sent a ripple through the entire paranormal research community. Patterns, loops, tones that rose and fell at regular intervals, almost musical, almost deliberate. A leaked clip later surfaced online. Some heard a child's voice underneath the distortion. Others claimed the hum mirrored old hospital machinery sounds from the 1970s, like heart monitors or anesthesia machines. But one audio engineer broke the file down further and discovered a chilling structure. The waveform bore striking similarities to early neural entrainment tests. These were sonic patterns used in classified experiments in the 1960s and 70s, allegedly to influence mood, behavior, and sleep cycles. A concept dismissed by mainstream science for decades, until rediscovered in classified patents from Cold War-era studies. And the signature frequency at the heart of those experiments? 17 hertz. The real question became, how was this frequency still playing? The building had no power, no working equipment, no known source. Some theorized residual energy from now missing devices. Others believed the tones were imprinted into the structure itself, like a forgotten broadcast stuck on loop transmitting into the silence, waiting for someone to finally listen. But another theory took hold online, that the hum wasn't residual at all. It was active, a signal, and the moment it was heard, it knew you were there. Because in the days following that recording's release, 2 of the investigators involved reported identical dreams. They were standing in a white room. A hallway outside pulsed with sound, and a voice calm, emotionless whispered, "You've heard it now. Return." One never spoke of it again. The other went back and never came out. The children who weren't on record. Hospitals document everything. Every heartbeat, every allergic reaction, every scream muffled behind a closed door. Paper trails stretch across miles of storage, filled with numbers, charts, signatures, and dates. Nothing is supposed to go undocumented, especially when it comes to children. But in the case of the Maine Hospital's Eastern Wing, there were no pediatric records past 1976. And yet, inside that sealed room beneath the humming wall, faded photographs were found, not in folders, not in cabinets, just scattered across the floor, dust-covered and water-damaged. Most were blurred, time having eaten away the faces and edges, but a few remained hauntingly clear. They showed children, some in gowns, some in street clothes, but all of them sitting in the same sterile room with the same blank expression. One girl, maybe 8 years old, looked directly at the lens. Behind her, something flickered in the observation glass. Researchers began to ask questions. Had this hospital once run a pediatric psychiatric unit? A neurological research program? None of the official logs indicated it. The hospital's old floor plans made no mention of children's wards, classrooms, or recreational spaces. There were no birth records tied to the building after 1973, and yet the faces kept surfacing. A local salvage crew, hired to remove asbestos from the West Wing in 2008, found a metal drawer fused shut by age and rust. Inside, more photos. Small square Polaroids. No names, no timestamps, just faces drawn, tired, blank. Some appeared in multiple shots, always wearing the same clothing, as if time hadn't moved for them. But one detail stood out in every image. No child ever appeared in the company of adults. Not once. The most disturbing find, however, came from the wall panel that hid the patient files. Wedged deep in the crevice behind the plaster, someone had slipped in a cassette tape. The label was handwritten. Session 7, audio only, do not duplicate. The tape opens with static, then a beep, then a voice, female, flat, professional. Subject 7, male, estimated age 5. Response to stimulus, neutral. Eye tracking, abnormal. Motor response, delayed. Subject does not recognize own name. A pause, another beep. Subject 8, female, estimated age 9. Response to name, negative. Refuses verbal interaction. Exhibits heightened sensitivity to specific tones. There were 14 subjects mentioned in total, but no full names, no parent information, no legal documentation, and no indication they had ever existed in state medical databases. It was as if these children were never born, only cataloged, processed through a system that didn't want them remembered. Locals started whispering theories. Were they orphans used in unauthorized experiments? Victims of a now erased psychological study? Survivors of trauma erased so thoroughly, even memory refused to hold them? Or worse, were they never supposed to leave? Some say the girl in the photograph still wanders the second floor, her feet barefoot on tile, holding a small toy that was never hers. Others claim to have heard a child's voice through the hospital intercom system, long after the wires were ripped from the wall. The vanishing janitor and the burned notebook. There are always people who know more than they're supposed to. People who keep their heads down, eyes sharp, mouth shut. At the Maine Hospital, that person was Eugene Wellera, night janitor who had worked the graveyard shift for nearly a decade before the hospital's closure in 1978. At the time, Eugene was seen as unremarkable, quiet, punctual, always with a thermos of coffee and a radio tuned to late-night talk shows. He rarely spoke unless spoken to, but after the hospital closed, he became the only former staff member to visit the building every year without fail. Always on the same night, October 12th. No one knew why. He never answered questions, never brought anyone with him, and never stayed long. A flashlight, a small backpack, a pocket notebook. In and out, never more than 30 minutes. In 2011, a group of amateur investigators tried to follow him. Armed with cameras and night vision, they waited at the tree line for hours until they saw his silhouette enter the collapsed east entrance. Around 2:17 a.m., but this time something changed. He didn't come back out. They waited until sunrise. They entered. No sign of Eugene. But in the old children's ward, beneath a cracked tile near the nurse's station, they found a melted flashlight, a charred notebook, and a smear of something dark on the floor that hadn't been there days prior. It wasn't blood, not exactly, but it wasn't rust either. The notebook's outer shell was ruined, but several interior pages survived. What they found was disturbing. not just for the content, but for the handwriting. The journal wasn't Eugene's. It was someone else's. Multiple entries, dated between 1975 and 1977, written in different hands, none signed. One page stood out. Third child nonverbal. Fails to recognize mirror reflection. Sleep disrupted. Avoids light. Increasing sensitivity to tape recordings. Dr. Mercer suggests acoustic restraint, but I won't do it. It feels wrong. They are frightened. They know something is coming. Another. Weller's been asking questions. Told him it was mold in the vents. He doesn't believe it. Heard him on the second floor. He was crying. Needs to be watched. This was the first documented mention of Eugene Weller's name tied to internal hospital activity. And according to hospital employment records, Eugene didn't officially begin working there until early 1976. So how did his name appear in a 1975 entry? Worse still, local police confirmed that Eugene Weller had no surviving family and no digital footprint since 2009. He had quietly cashed out a modest retirement fund, stopped paying property taxes, and vanished. The house he owned was found unlocked, dust-covered, with a single note left behind. They still wake me, even when I don't sleep. No body, no sightings, no leads. But ever since his last visit to the hospital, a recurring phenomenon has plagued late-night explorers. A dragging sound down the main corridor, followed by a low metallic hum, as if someone were pushing a mop bucket across the tile, and whistling. Always the same tune, always unfinished. Static tapes and the unauthorized room. By 2016, interest in the abandoned Maine hospital had intensified. Urban explorers, paranormal enthusiasts, and YouTube documentarians began venturing into the building, hoping to catch a glimpse of something unexplained. Most walked away with moldy photos, old charts, and chills they blamed on the wind. But one group, the Halifax 3, captured something they weren't prepared for. Armed with body cams and a handheld cassette recorder, the trio entered through the west loading bay around 10:11 p.m. Their plan was simple: spend 6 hours inside, split up for the last hour, and document any anomalous sounds or visual disturbances. Everything went as expected until they reached Ward B7, a wing that didn't appear on any floor plan. At the end of a long, narrow hallway, sealed with a red-painted door, they found a keypad lock. It was old, rusted, and covered in dried hospital tape. Written across the door in faded Sharpie, nitrogen monoxide entry, "Do not unlock, not a patient room." Curiosity overrode caution. They broke in. The door groaned open with a suction-like sound, releasing a chemical stench unlike anything they'd encountered in the rest of the building. The room beyond was smaller than expected, more like a storage chamber than a ward, but it wasn't empty. In the center sat a metal chair bolted to the floor. A set of headphones, frayed and smeared with something dark, hung over its back. A cassette deck recorder was embedded into the wall with a slot labeled Series D Subject 6A. They inserted the tape they had brought to document ambient sound, just static at first, then something else. Whispers, at first indistinct, a mix of breathing and soft syllables. But the audio file, analyzed frame by frame later, revealed a voice layered beneath the static, repeating the same line: "If you hear this, do not wake them." Then came the scream. Not from the tape, from one of the explorers. Devin, the youngest of the group, had collapsed, blood from his ears. Eyes rolled back. He had removed the headphones, thrown them across the room, and muttered something that only the recorder picked up clearly. "I was in the wall. They carried him out of the hospital that night. He survived, but was never the same." In the days following the incident, the tape was uploaded to a private server for analysis. A digital forensics expert noted that the recording contained anomalous frequency spikes, sonic, waves that mimicked the brain's delta patterns during sleep paralysis. In other words, the recording could force a dream state in awake individuals. But the dream wasn't theirs. It was someone else's. When the hospital's original architect was tracked down, he confirmed that no such room existed in the blueprints he designed. B7 wasn't part of his plans. The wing, he claimed, was added later by a private research contractor whose name he was never told. Today, the entrance to Ward B7 is sealed again, this time welded shut by the local fire department after an unrelated incident caused part of the floor above to collapse. But those who've listened to the digital version of that recording online report similar symptoms: nausea, fatigue, vivid dreams of a flickering light behind a closed door, and in rare cases, nosebleeds. And yet the file is still up, still spreading, still being heard, just like it wanted. The Mercury files and the reconstructed faces. A month after the Halifax 3 incident, a group of forensic archivists from Bangor University received an anonymous package. No return address, no note. Just a padded envelope, dust-covered and brittle, containing 4 manila folders and a mini DV tape labeled only with a symbol, the ancient alchemical sign for Mercury. Inside the folders were photographs, some Polaroid, some printed from microfilm, and typed reports dated between 1977 and 1978, referencing patients listed only by initials, GL, HF, MC, and JN. Each report began identically. Subject transferred to East Wing Experimental Ward under Directive 29C. Initiation of compound exposure commenced at 0300 hours. Monitoring for neuroretinal detachment and psychospatial displacement initiated. What stood out was not the cold, clinical tone of the documents, but the alterations on each patient's face. Every photo had been manipulated. Some showed facial blurring. Others had thin lines etched around the eyes and forehead, as if mapped for surgical procedures or something more abstract. But one image, found tucked between the pages of Subject JN's file, shook the entire department. It was a reconstructed face, hand-sketched in charcoal, but with features exaggerated, eyes too large, jaw too narrow, mouth stitched. Beneath the sketch, in faded red ink, "Do not attempt retrieval. She dreams outward." The accompanying DV tape was more troubling. Digitized by the team's tech supervisor, the footage began with static and timestamp data. June 5, 1978, 2 hours 58 minutes and 49 seconds. It then cut to surveillance-style footage of a tiled room walls lined with oxygen tanks, monitoring machines, and 3 beds, only one of which was occupied. A young woman, no older than 16, sat upright, staring into the camera, unmoving. Electrodes were attached to her temples. She wasn't blinking. A voice off camera asked a single question: "What are you seeing?" She responded without moving her mouth: "I see your mother. She's afraid of the snow." Then the screen glitched. In a single frame caught during analysis, an overlay appeared on the tape, a mirrored version of the same room, but decayed, burned, abandoned. In this reflection, the girl was gone. The bed empty, the electrodes hung loose. And on the back wall, where the chartboard used to hang, was a hand-drawn version of the Mercury symbol. Beneath it, smeared in what appeared to be ink or something darker, was a question: "Did you dream it, or did she?" When this discovery reached the few remaining staff of the Maine Hospital, who had worked during the 1970s, 2 refused to comment. But one, a retired night orderly, offered a single statement: they weren't patients, not all of them. Some were watchers. Some were doors. The Mercury files were never officially claimed. The original copies vanished from the university's archives a month later. But the digital scans persist in forums and deep web threads, where they're analyzed, obsessed over, and some say used for rituals meant to unlock memory fragments buried by trauma or drugs. Most who dive into the documents report feeling watched. Others stop sleeping altogether. And a few? They claim that when they stare at the sketched face long enough, it starts blinking. The room that wasn't on any blueprint. In the early fall of 2003, a team of real estate developers began surveying the old Maine Hospital property for potential demolition. The plan was simple: raise the decaying structure and rebuild a mixed-use facility of shops, clinics, and apartments. On paper, it was a profitable opportunity. But on the third day of mapping the site, the architectural team hit a discrepancy. The original floor plans, retrieved from the town's planning commission, listed 127 rooms across all wings of the building. But when the developers performed an internal sweep, they counted 128. One extra room. And yet, there was no door. It was located in the west end of the east wing, behind what looked like a sealed concrete wall poured flat and smooth, unlike the rest of the surrounding structure. No cracks, no seams. Just an empty stretch between the old recovery hallway and the surgical storage unit. The anomaly caught the attention of structural analyst Peter Lansing, who had worked on numerous Cold War-era facility reconstructions. He immediately recognized something odd. The electromagnetic readings near that wall spiked significantly, as if the wiring behind it was still live, despite the hospital being without power for decades. Thermal scans revealed a small, contained space behind the wall, roughly 12 feet by 12 feet. No ventilation, no plumbing, no registered utility service. Lansing ordered a core drill. The team expected to find an empty storage space, maybe a forgotten supply closet. But when they breached the concrete and inserted the snake camera, no one said a word for over 4 minutes. Because what they saw shouldn't have existed. The camera panned across a fully preserved room. Wallpaper intact. A brass bed frame. White sheets folded tight. A small desk with a lamp and a journal. And sitting in the center of the bed, a hospital gown neatly laid out, clean, pressed, awaiting a patient. The journal was open to a page, handwriting visible. In black ink, block letters, dated August 18, 1978, they said I could stay if I promised not to tell anyone what I saw. I said I didn't see anything, but I did. I saw her in the mirror again. She had my face. Below that line was a small, childlike drawing 2 stick figures. One smiling, one with X's for eyes. The developers halted the project. 2 days later, the sealed wall was mysteriously re-cemented overnight, and no one on the team took responsibility for it. When city inspectors arrived for a follow-up, the room was gone again. Thermal scans now showed nothing but solid concrete. No space. No wiring. No residual heat. The project was quietly shelved. The development company dissolved a year later. And Peter Lansing? He left the architectural field entirely, relocating to coastal Oregon. He now runs a blog about architectural anomalies, where he never mentions the Maine Hospital by name. But in one obscure post from 2009, he wrote, "Some rooms aren't built. They're remembered into existence. And some blueprints? They only show what you're supposed to see. The girl in the window who shouldn't have been there." It started with a photograph. In 2011, local photographer and urban explorer Mara Ellis entered the abandoned Maine Hospital during an early autumn storm. She was documenting decaying architecture for a university project. Her camera, a vintage Nikon loaded with high-grain black and white film, captured long, moody exposures of shattered hallways, collapsed ceilings, and weathered signage. When she developed the film days later, one image stood out. It was a shot of the hospital's south courtyard, taken from the outside. The building's third-floor windows stretched across the top of the frame like a row of empty, broken eyes. Except one window wasn't empty. In the upper right pane of the photo, a face appeared. Pale, expressionless, framed by dark, shoulder-length hair. Eyes wide open, staring directly into the camera. Mara didn't remember seeing anyone else that day. The hospital had been silent. Still, no signs of squatters or other explorers. She zoomed in on the image again and again, convinced it was an artifact, a flaw in the film. But the face remained. It wasn't blurry. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was impossibly precise. She returned to the site a week later, this time with a digital camera. She climbed to the same angle and lined up the shot. The window was shattered. Nothing inside but dust and debris. But as she turned to leave, she heard it. A soft knock. 3 taps, faint and rhythmic, coming from the other side of the glass. She froze, raised her camera again. And then, without warning, the air turned cold, unnaturally cold, like walking into a freezer. She ran. When Mara uploaded her footage that night, every file had been corrupted. The only surviving piece was the original photo from the week before. The girl in the window, still staring. Curious, she began digging through the hospital's archives. There were no missing person reports filed within the building in the years before its closure. But in a faculty newsletter dated June 1978, she found a small, barely legible notice. Psychiatric Intake Unit welcomes new long-term resident, Jay Allerton, age 12. Subject under evaluation. Parental release waived. No further mention of that patient exists in any hospital records. No discharge, no death certificate. Just a single photo, and a name that no one seems to remember. That is, until the comments began appearing under Mara's blog. Strangers from across the country, different ages, different cities, but all describing the same vision. I saw her in the reflection. I don't know how, but I know it was her. They drew her from memory. Every sketch matched the face in Mara's photo. And always, without fail, they included one disturbing detail. The girl wasn't blinking, because what they saw wasn't alive. It was something caught between memory and mirror. The return of patient 0. The files behind the wall had long been sealed, but one of them, file 0, stood out. Unlike the others labeled with sequential numbers and scribbled notes, this one was entirely blank on the outside, except for a hand-drawn symbol pressed into the surface. A circle, intersected by a vertical line that split the page like a spine. At the base of the line, a single red dot. This was the file the archivist refused to touch. It wasn't listed in any known inventory. No intake form, no psychiatric evaluation, no signature from attending doctors. It contained only a single page, brittle and discolored, marked with what appeared to be burnt edges. And on that page, written in tight, looping cursive, they brought her in under emergency conditions. No name, no memory. But she spoke a number, over and over again. 0, 0, 0, 0. Below the note, a single Polaroid had been stapled. The same face. The same girl Mara had photographed through the window. Dated May 9, 1978. But the timestamp conflicted with everything. According to every other document, the psychiatric wing didn't exist until July of that year. Someone was altering timelines. Over the next few days, the local newspaper archive system experienced a breach. Dozens of articles between May and July of 1978 vanished without trace. Librarians assumed a software glitch. But when microfilms were consulted, those too had been cut, physically sliced, removing entire weeks of headlines. Whatever happened inside that hospital, someone had tried to erase it, but it got worse. A former nurse, long retired and living in seclusion under witness protection, came forward after seeing Mara's blog post. She agreed to be interviewed anonymously. Her words chilled the room. They told us never to call her by name. Just the patient. Said she'd been found wandering outside the perimeter fence at dawn. She was barefoot. Mud up to her knees. No injuries. And she kept whispering, "They're not gone. They're just quiet now." When asked who they were, the nurse refused to continue. She ended the call and died 2 days later. Cardiac arrest, but the final photo on her phone showed something strange. A blurry shape in the mirror behind her. Dark hair, pale skin, unblinking eyes. Underscore patient 0 had never left. She was the origin, not of a virus or disease, but of something far harder to contain. Memory. Buried, altered, resurfacing. Because every place she's seen, windows, mirrors, cameras, goes cold after. And once you've read her file, you become part of it. Room 5A was never built. The blueprints told one story. The building told another. According to every official architectural diagram filed with the city between 1976 and 1978, the 5th floor of the Maine Hospital had 4 patient rooms labeled 5B through 5E. Number 5A, no gaps in sequence, no scribbled erasures, no signs of edits. But Mara's footage, enhanced and slowed frame by frame, revealed a door marked 5A in the background of her thermal scan. A momentary flicker, as if it was there only when the sensors weren't looking directly at it. The walls formed the right shape. The shadows lined up. But in person, there was no door. Just plaster. A smooth, unbroken wall. As if the door had been painted over and forgotten. That is, until she knocked. The knock echoed differently than on other walls. Hollow, deeper. Something was behind it. Mara returned with a hammer. 3 swings cracked the surface. A 4th collapsed a section inward, revealing not just a room, but a space preserved in airless dust. A perfectly intact patient room. A gurney. A bedside table. And on the wall, written in red crayon, "I wasn't supposed to be here." The room reeked of something stale, not decay, but sealed breath, like someone had been inside recently. Yet there were no footprints on the dusty floor, only wheel marks. A chair had been moved, but there was no chair present. Inside the drawer, she found a nameplate, Dr. E. Vansner Department. Isolation and anomalies. No such department ever existed. When Mara asked her historian contact, they went digging into 1978 staff rosters. No Dr. Vantner listed. But in 1952, nearly 3 decades earlier, there was a Dr. Elias Vantner, known for pioneering controversial sensory deprivation techniques for trauma patients. He died in 1957. So what was his nameplate doing in a sealed room in a hospital wing built in 1977? Mara retrieved a tape recorder left under the gurney. It clicked on as soon as she touched it. Day 1. Subject resists assimilation. Day 2. She speaks in reversed phrases. Day 3. Requests darkness at all times. Day 4. Door cannot be located from outside. Day 5. She's beginning to call herself Mara. The recorder stopped, but Mara hadn't said her name aloud since entering the building. She dropped the device and ran. Outside, the door to room 5A was gone again. Only the cracked wall remained. And behind her, from the topmost window of the 5th floor, someone watched her leave. The hospital was demolished in 1981. Or was it? According to city records, the Maine Hospital was condemned in 1980 and completely demolished in 1981. A fire inspection report, photos of wreckage, and signed permits confirmed the event. The land was cleared, the rubble removed, and nothing was ever rebuilt on the site. Just an empty lot surrounded by a chain-link fence and overgrown weeds. And yet, every time Mara visited the property, her GPS insisted she was inside a building. Coordinates didn't match open land. They matched internal corridors, as if the hospital's blueprint still cast a shadow on the digital map. On her final visit, she brought a drone. It flew low over the lot. Nothing but wild grass and old concrete. Then it glitched. The signal dropped. When Mara retrieved the footage, the last 2 seconds showed something impossible. An open door in the ground, barely visible, but clearly shaped. Concrete edges, a rusted metal handle, and stairs descending into dark. There was no indication of this structure from above. No vents, no sound. And yet, the moment the drone passed over, a faint light flickered inside that opening, fluorescent like hospital lighting. Mara returned the next day. The door was gone, but the grass was flattened, as if something had recently pushed its way to the surface. She checked the official satellite feed from a weather station database. At 3:12 a.m., the timestamp matched the drone's last ping. The image from above? A glowing rectangular outline, measuring exactly 23 feet by 45 feet, the dimensions of Ward C, according to the original 1977 hospital plans. A building that had been buried, burned, or bulldozed was somehow still there. Not rebuilt. Not rebuilt on top. Still standing, just not where we could see it. And the final question remains. If the hospital was demolished, why do its lights still flicker every year on the same day it shut down?